In the last video, you learned all about constructs and also how to apply the site-size measuring technique, as well as a few essential tools and how to use them properly. In this video, we're going to begin the drawing, first by establishing the larger proportions and shapes before moving on to the smaller details. So we'll start by using an HB pencil, which is fairly light in color, and we want to make sure that it's long and that it's well sharpened with a nice long tip. Then we'll use one of our measuring sticks, and you hold the measuring stick using your thumb and your two middle fingers to grasp it, leaving your forefinger and your pinky free to move around. That allows you to actually pull the stick close to the palm of your hand so that you can lay it pretty flat against the board. And you're using your index finger and your fingernail to mark accurately the point that you're trying to measure. So let's begin. I'm going to start here with this measurement. Right there. And you'll notice I'm putting down, as I mark the spot, I'm also doing it in a sort of a little stroke in the direction that the line is actually going to go. Then I'm going to go to the top of the head. So we always start with our largest measurements first and the outer boundaries. So we'll start with the top of the head, the side of the scarf, the left-hand cheek, and as well as the chin. Then I'll move into the interior and establish the diagonal boundary set by the scarf right above her forehead. I'm going to make a couple more. I'm going to start here at the top of the scarf, and I'm going to use this point where the intersection between the scarf and the line hit in order to make my measurement. I'm going to go there. So I can begin to put this line. And then I'm going to start making some other measurements, and I'm going to be looking throughout the image, and I'm going to be looking for clues as to where I want to make my measurements. And there's two places that you want to look that aren't sort of obviously on the axis line. So the first thing is that lines go and they change direction. And where I want to make a measurement is usually what I call the apex. It's at the top point of where a line goes. In other words, it comes up here, hits that point, and then it begins to descend again. So I'm looking for the point where it actually hits that apex. But I'm also at the same time looking for other what I call landmarks, areas where things are happening that I can also use as guidelines, as a place to actually measure from and orient myself. So up here where it's what I call the apex of the top of the head there, I'm looking at that, and it's right about also where this shadow actually hits on the side of the temple. So I'm going to use that spot as my measuring point. And so when I go in and I go to measure how far it comes out, I can see that it needs to come out this far. Go up, check. Sure enough, that's exactly where it is. So then I can connect this. Then I'm going to continue this line in, and so I'm looking for another point. So I'm going to go along the side of the scarf, and I'm going to see where it ends right there. So I'm going to choose right there. So I know this is the point where the scarf goes up. And I also know this is where the other one goes down. And I'll make a decision right here along with this one. See how far it goes up. So right there, it goes there. So now I know that I can connect these lines. Right at the chin, I'm going to see how far the scarf goes out. Goes out to right. So I know that this line goes along here, and then it goes out slightly. Just going down. That's there. So I continue to connect my lines and then begin to make some of my smaller measurements within the face area, always referring to my axis line in the center and then measuring out to some of the apex points, for instance, her brow and her cheekbone on the left side of her face. I'm going to measure this particular angle right here on the jaw. go back, double check. It's a little high, so I make a slight adjustment. And you'll notice the quality of the line that I'm making. It's a very light, sweeping line. I'm not attached to this line. I know that eventually this line is going to go, but I want to make these sweeping lines. And you'll also notice how far back I'm holding my pencil. I'm not in there being, careful like this. No, no, no. I'm making these sweep, loose gestural lines in order to establish these first plotting marks. So I'm going to check where the mouth is, and I notice that it's that mouth, the absolute corner of the mouth is right on one of my axis lines there. So I'm going to measure down and establish where the absolute corner of that mouth is. So because I now know where that is, I can then measure how far this goes out. So that gives me a point where I can accurately measure how far it is on the side. So now I know I can go down here. I'm also going to measure out where the bridge of the nose is. And from there, I can measure down where the chin is. So I can extend this line so I know the chin comes out slightly from this edge, and now I know it goes up on an angle like that. And so I'm using these loose sweeping lines and to establish what I call plotting lines. These lines are doing exactly this. They're just plotting where things are on the page from a very loose, basic, and large proportion stage.
I established the tip of the nose and the angle that it's sloping downward on. Also, I established the boundaries for the ear.
So now I'm just going to continue plotting all the larger proportions and major lines and angles in order to establish this drawing on the page.
I continue to establish the jawline, the neck, the collar of her jacket, and also the upper and side boundaries of the scarf that's wrapped on her head.
So you'll notice as I've been going through this, what I'm looking for all the time are little clues. I'm giving myself not only this axis line to measure from, but I'm looking for all what I call landmarks. And landmarks are basically all these areas where something intersects with something else. Either it intersects with my axis line or it lines up with something else. So you'll notice that the corner of the eye also happens to line up with the corner of the mouth. This part of the shadow lines up with the bottom of the eyelid. So when we're measuring, actually the image is giving us all kinds of clues as to where to look in order to compare and align and use our angles and to bounce off of all kinds of information inside of the image in order to facilitate an accurate measuring process.
So I had to continue to plot my lines for her coat, different areas of the scarf, and also the placement of the earring. Basically, all the large outer boundaries of the drawing.
So now that I've established this kind of basic large proportions to the drawing, and you notice the kind of line that I'm using and how far I'm holding my pencil. I'm using this nice sweeping, light gestural line. My pencil is barely touching the paper. There's none of this trying to draw and pressing hard and grinding. No, 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 no. What we want to do is have a very light touch, because I know that I'm going to lose these lines. They're just here temporarily as plotting lines. So I'm looking for a sweeping gestural line that's going to lightly plot where all the large proportions are within the drawing. As much as I'm going for accuracy during the construct process, I'm not married to absolute accuracy right now. I'm looking for general proportions. What I do want to make sure, though, at this stage is that things are accurate on a general level in terms of outer boundaries and things like that. So you can always go back in before you go any further and double check those and make sure they're okay. But for the most part, a lot of these lines are going to disappear anyway. So now that I've got the bigger areas, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start plotting some of my interior shapes and the features of the face. Now you have a knowledge as to how to start your drawings by first establishing the larger proportions and shapes. In the next video, we're going to focus on establishing key facial landmarks, as well as creating our smaller shapes. We're also going to look at our values and establish the lights and darks in our image and create what we call shadow shapes. And if you're interested in exploring more advanced techniques and would love to learn the skills to create beautiful and realistic portraits, you can. Just go to my Patreon site and find out how. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.